Klassen to pound the table for someone post-draft. Derek, who you pounded the table for?
Devon Achane, drafted by the Miami Dolphins. I don't remember who it was on Twitter, but somebody had actually asked me like a month before the draft, like, hey, what if Devon Achane got into Miami? Wouldn't that be sick? I'd be like, they kind of already have enough fast guys, but that is about as perfect a fit as it was going to get for him in that like outside zone scheme that they do. They do such a good job of stretching the field, giving a guy like him space. You add just on top of like his world-class sprinter stuff, his vision is unbelievable. So I feel like he's the guy who's going to squeeze out so much in that system. So he went a little bit later than I was hoping, but I'm very, very excited for him in that offense.
Awesome. Awesome. Listeners, you heard it here first. Go get you some Devon Achane. Now let's get to the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Most Accurate Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brandon Niles. With me is my excellent co-host, as always, Jen Akins. Jen, how's it going, buddy?
It's going. We have moved past the draft. Very exciting. May is here. Spring's in the air. I really can't complain. How are you, Brandon?
I'm doing pretty good. I got a new hat my wife gave me, so I'm excited. Nice. I'm excited for Mariners season. Baseball season is underway, which is good. I associate baseball with fantasy drafts, so it's all good things, good weather and everything. So I'm doing good. And this week I'm especially doing well because we're going to be joined by Derek Klassen. You can find Derek's stuff at New York Times Sports and Bleacher Report. Definitely follow Derek on Twitter at QBClass. That's class with a K, one of my favorite Twitter follows. Derek, thank you so much for joining us. It was really nice to see you again. How you doing?
Doing great. It feels good to finally have the draft actually behind us and do more of these like cool down shows and kind of ease our way into the off season. Feels good.
Excellent. And I got to ask you a K-pop question because you're one of the few people that I interact with who likes K-pop. I gotta admit, outside of a quick listen to NMIX's extended play Aspergo, I haven't really listened to anything new. Any favorites to share before we dig in?
Well, that is a good one. I actually like that album a lot. It's been one of my favorites this year. I would say a group called IVE just dropped like a full-length album, which is actually pretty rare for K-pop. But I don't want to oversell it, but it's probably my favorite K-pop album since like 2019. Like every single track is an absolute turbo banger, and I just am in love with it. So I would say that. And then there's a group called Billy with 3 L's. They also released a really, really good EP. So I would say that too.
Ivan, Billy, thank you so much. It'll go in my rotation because I just keep spinning Blackpink over and over again from last year.
That also works.
Excellent.
My God, you guys are like Charlie Brown teachering right now. I have nothing.
This is fun stuff. So before we get into it, I want to introduce our listeners to 444's YouTube membership plan. Become a member of our YouTube channel. Get access to perks such as live stream loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, priority reply to video comments. That means we will answer your questions first. Merchandise promo codes. You get all these perks for less than $2 a month. Join our membership program today at youtube.com/@444/join. Veteran corner, before we talk rookies, I want to talk DeAndre Swift a little bit. Jen, let's start with you. Your boy DeAndre Swift, Bulldog, was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. Tell me a little bit about how you're approaching Swift in that Philly backfield.
I'm excited for him that he did get out of the situation with the Lions after they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. I was like, that can't be ugly, or can't be good. But at the same time, Philly, better offense in general, right? But it's pretty cloudy. It's not great. You've got Penny who does get hurt, but you've got Gainwell, you have Boston Scott. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if it. I guess technically it does improve his fantasy draft stock going to the Eagles over the Lions, but at the same time, fantasy RB2. I don't know if it really moves the needle that much.
Yeah, it's tough to know where to go in that backfield. We saw in the playoffs, Derek, we saw Kenneth Gainwell really become a big part of that offense. Do you think that DeAndre Swift arriving means Kenneth Gainwell takes a major backseat in that offense, or do you think we see more of a three-headed monster?
I would think that he probably takes a backseat because I think generally all the things that Gainwell is good at, Swift, they brought in a similar player who is just bigger and better in a lot of ways. Like he's going to give you receiving value, home run hitter who is kind of blind in between the tackles sometimes. Like I think they're kind of similar players in that sense. So I assume what they want to do for as long as Penny is healthy is make Penny the starting running back. He's going to be kind of like the bell cow almost, kind of be the leader in that sense. And then just have Swift as like the change of pace, home run hitter, try to run some outside runs, use him as a third down back and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm assuming is the plan for as long as everyone is healthy. But I think we know with all these players in the Eagles backfield now, they're not going to be healthy for that long. So if Penny goes down or something, like Swift could absolutely just be a full-time back. I wouldn't be that surprised.
I'm sure hoping Penny can stay healthy. That poor kid, he's so good. He just can't stay on the field. Let's talk about why Swift was traded. Jahmyr Gibbs.
Swift is kind of in the same boat, though.
He is.
He can't stay healthy either.
So maybe Kenneth Gainwell is my late best ball pick. Maybe that's why.
It's not a bad plan.
All right. Jahmyr Gibbs, the talented, multifaceted back out of Alabama, was drafted 12th overall to the Detroit Lions. That's what brought on the trade of DeAndre Swift to Philadelphia. Derek, let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs and the Detroit backfield. They brought in David Montgomery. What do you think Gibbs' role is going to be there in Detroit, especially in year one?
I think what's funny is I kind of tweeted something like this. By drafting Gibbs, they basically just doubled down on the idea of DeAndre Swift, but we're done with like the original DeAndre Swift. Because I think they're very, very similar players. Where like Gibbs, unbelievable receiver. That's obviously that's why they drafted him when they did. Home run speed, like he's probably going to come into the league and be one of the biggest explosive guys in the league pretty immediately. Really quick, really fast, all that stuff. But kind of like Swift, I'm not all that sure about what he gives you between the tackles. I think sometimes his vision can be a little just very inconsistent. Swift is more inconsistent and kind of just runs himself into trouble, whereas Gibbs is more, he stops his feet a lot and doesn't really plow through the line the way that he should. So they're different in that sense, but generally they struggle a little bit between the tackles. But that's why I think signing David Montgomery was incredible, because that's what he's good at. And I think in a lot of ways, he's going to play that Jamal Williams role, but he's a little bit more complete. He's a little bit more explosive himself. He's a little bit more efficient, all that stuff. So I think really they just got a better version of what their backfield was last year. Like they went for very similar 1-2 punch. They just got straight up upgrades, I would say.
Production-wise, Gibbs gets an Alvin Kamara comparison a lot. That's what he got going into the draft. Are there any truth to that? You think we could see that kind of production?
Maybe in the passing game. I would say in the running game, no, for two reasons. One, Kamara's vision, I think, is a little bit better. I don't think he's like peak Le'Veon Bell or anything, but I think his vision was a little bit more consistent. And then the thing to me that separated Kamara from Gibbs is Gibbs's balance is fine. Like, it's not going to be a problem. He's not going to get hit every time and go down immediately. But Kamara's balance for someone that size is unbelievable. Like the way that he plays with such a wide stance and does an unbelievable job of knocking bodies off. And I just don't think Gibbs quite has that, which I think is why he's a little bit worse between the tackles. So as a runner, I don't know if I see that kind of production, but as a receiver, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Zachary Murdoch. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining in. I don't think Rashad Penny gets cut. It was a pretty low-cost contract, so at worst, he's depth for the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think we're going to see, like Derek said, I think we're going to see a lot of Penny on early downs, and I think we're going to see a lot of DeAndre Swift in the passing game. I don't think he gets cut. Thank you very much for the question. We're going to play a little Who'd You Rather, because that's one of my favorite games to play on a podcast. So do a few rookies here. We're going to talk, start with the quarterbacks. It's the easiest one, the number 1 pick versus the number 2 pick. Derek, I'm going to ask you from a football perspective, and then Jen, I'm going to ask you from a fantasy perspective after Derek's response. So, Derek, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, number 1 or number 2? Who do you like better as the quarterback?
I like CJ Stroud. It's kind of weird because I kind of have to couch it with the idea of like, I think Bryce Young could actually be very, very good on like a rookie contract. I'm one of those people that really had problems with his size. And I think, especially in terms of longevity, I think it's going to be a big problem for him. So that is why I kind of would lean the other way. But I also just love Stroud anyway. Like, he was my quarterback 1. I think one of the reasons I loved him is he clearly got better in college, like from going back all the way to his first start against like Minnesota or something in 2021. And then all the way to that game against Georgia. It doesn't even look like the same player, which is incredible. Like, he just got so much better at managing the pocket, playing outside the pocket, creating a little bit. The fact that he could show that growth at such a young age, I thought was incredible. And then you add that on top of the fact that he's one of the most accurate college quarterbacks I think I've ever seen. And it's not even just like he has the arm talent to do it. It's he understands like how to throw against certain leverages, like where defenders are coming, where windows are closing. Like, oh, if a safety's driving down on a route, okay, I got to throw it low so my guy can go scoop it. Like, just that sort of stuff. He just has like a very mature understanding of accuracy, and I think that kind of stuff is going to translate pretty well.
Both are sure fun to watch. I loved watching C.J. Stroud in the college playoffs there, and Bryce Young just magic every time he has the ball. Jen, Young ends up with Carolina Panthers, which are going to have an entirely new offense this year, and Stroud ends up with the Houston Texans, who are the Houston Texans. So, what do we think from a fantasy perspective this year and moving forward?
The answer to the would you rather is really neither in redraft.
Sure.
They're both, I mean, you're not drafting either of them to be your main quarterback in your fantasy league this year. They're both, I would put them in, quarterback 2 categories for fantasy. So if you're looking at it from a best ball perspective, I mean, I guess I kind of prefer Young just based on, weaponry. I think Carolina has a little bit more talent than Houston, and they're not, like you said, Houston. But I think both of them, I don't know that one is really like heads and tails above the other from a fantasy perspective. I think they're pretty similar in that QB2 category.
Sure, that makes sense to me. Emiliano asked about Kendre Miller, or has Kendre Miller, wants to know if they should move off Alvin Kamara for a future 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. I'm probably the most dynasty person on this podcast right now, so I would say Kamara depends on the status of your team. If you're a win now team, I would hold on to Kamara. I think that trade is going to be there week 6 during the season. If your season starts to go belly up, I think you'll still be able to get that kind of return for Kamara. If your team is starting over 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, probably isn't a bad return for Kamara right now, although I'd try to get something for 2024, which looks like a little bit stronger of a draft. So let's go on to the next position. Derek, I've got a couple of tight ends. Michael Mayer or Sam LaPorta. They went back-to-back. Mayer went to the Raiders. LaPorta went to Detroit, pick earlier. Which tight end do you like better? Because I think that was a surprise on draft day.
Yeah, so I like Sam LaPorta a lot. I think he's like fairly athletic. His run after catch stuff is good. He's tough. He's a fairly good blocker, even though I think he's not as big as people think that he is because he's an Iowa tight end. I think they assume he's a little bit bigger, and he's really not. But he's a good blocker for his size. However, I thought Michael Mayer was the best offensive player in the class, not named Bijan Robinson. So, Mayer was just – I know he didn't test like an elite athlete, and I know everyone is like really big on like if you're going to take a tight end, they have to be an elite athlete, all that stuff. But he was still an above-average athlete, and when you watch him play, it's just like – it's almost like Stroud in the sense where just everything he does feels so mature, like the way that he's running routes, the way that he's snapping people off, the way that he's using his arms to create like little bits of separation at the end, the way that he boxes people out at the catch point and like in the red zone. He's just, to me, it feels like he's so ready-made to go be an 800-yard tight end, like out of the gate. I'm very, very excited about him.
Jason Witten was the comp. I mean, he had a pretty good career there. Hall of Fame player there. Jen, fantasy-wise, like LaPorta is kind of more the receiving back, but Mayer looks like the all-around player. Both teams have a need at the position. Who are you targeting?
I kind of like LaPorta, just based on opportunity. I mean, he's sliding right in, as the tight end 1 for the Lions. I mean, they're they had a ragtag, James Mitchell, and I can't even remember the other 2 guys that they had last year. Once Hawkinson left, obviously. The Lions there really isn't, you've got, I don't know. I just feel like there's more opportunity there. Now with Mayer, Austin Hooper is there. We can't forget about him. He's at least, somebody, and I feel like he maybe use a little, well, I mean, look, I just feel like he maybe use like more as a blocker, with Hooper. I just feel like production wise and targets wise, I feel like, LaPorta is the better fantasy bet this year, but there's a big but there, as we all know. Historically, rookie tight ends are not great for fantasy. So I wouldn't consider LaPorta, I wouldn't draft him early. He's not a tight end 1 by any stretch, but in best ball, he's draftable, and he's probably going to end up in the streaming conversation, I would think, by week 3 or 4, depending, but he's my guy there.
Makes sense to me. And Brock Wright is the name you were looking for Detroit. And
Shane Zylstra or whatever, right?
Shane Zylstra was around. I don't know if he's still on that roster, but yeah, Brock Wright's still running around there doing Brock Wright things. Derek, let's go to the wide receiver position. I'm going to be honest with you. I wanted to do who'd you rather players that I just don't know anything about. And Jonathan Mingo for the Panthers and Jayden Reed for the Packers, 2 second-rounders. I really don't know anything about these 2 players. So who'd you rather, and tell me, inform me, help me know some stuff.
I like them both. I had pretty close grades on both of them. I'll start with Reed because I am going to go Mingo. Reed is, I was actually surprised the Packers took him because I think he was like 187, and they don't take guys who are under 200 unless it's like an exception. And they don't make very many of those. So I was surprised they did it, but he's a really clean route runner. I think he's like a good, not great athlete. I think he's a good and consistent separator. He's not going to be, AJ Brown or Stephon Diggs or anything like that, but I think he can be like a good number 2 in terms of separation. And then he's a really good ball winner for a guy who's like 5'10", 187. He just has a very good understanding of how to get up there, how to keep the defender out of his body, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know immediately if he's going to be the Packers number 2, but I think in a couple of years that could absolutely be the case with him and Christian Watson being like a really nice duo. Mingo is the one. I really love him. He's just the type of receiver I love. He's like 6'3", 220, and just runs like the wind. Like, I mean, those guys, I will take those every time. It's an easy comp to make because they went to the same school, but it's very DK Metcalf-ish. Mingo is a little bit more of like the bigger power slot than the true X that like Metcalf is. So they play a little bit different position, but I just think Mingo, like at his size to run the way that he does, and actually have like a decent understanding of how to run his routes and like how to sink and get out of stuff. I just think he's going to be a ball player. Like guys that size that run like that don't fail very often, especially when teams go up and draft them as high as he got drafted. I think it was like around pick 50 or something. So like all of that combined with, I love Frank Reich, and I think they kind of have, that team has a little bit of a hole at the exact role that he needs, which is like that power slot, run over the middle, down the field, all that sort of stuff. So I love the player and the fit there. I'm a big fan of Mingo.
Is this the end of Terrace Marshall for any of us who were holding out hope?
I would say so.
Makes sense. No, I like, you've sold me. I'm all in on Jonathan Mingo as a part-time Panthers fan and suddenly a big Bryce Young fan. But Jen, Mingo, Jayden Reed, based off what Derek has said and the landing spots there, the roles that we're seeing, who are you looking at between the two of them?
Well, for argument's sake, I'm going to go Reed, and that's once again just based on opportunity. There's not a lot after Christian Watson. You got Romeo Doubs, who's very inconsistent last season. They lost. They got a new tight end, which I think we'll talk about him in a little bit. But I feel like just opportunity-wise, he has a way to come in and be, wide receiver too. Now, we also don't know really what Jordan Love has. So that's a little bit sketch there. But then again, we got a rookie quarterback in Carolina too. So I'm going Reed just for argument's sake.
I like it. 2 new tight ends in Green Bay. We had a second rounder and a third rounder, which we're going to get to. But Jen, let's talk receivers for a little while.
Oh, okay. Let's. All right. So we got 4 wide receivers that went back to back in the first round. You got Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, Quentin, Johnston, Zay Flowers, and Jordan Addison. So Derek, how do you feel about those 4? Rank them and their impact. What do you think?
As prospects, I had it Johnston, Smith-Njigba, Addison, and then Flowers, I believe. But I really like them both. And I actually think in particular, Flowers, I think, is in a great spot to actually produce. Because I think even though the room is a little bit more crowded than we're used to in Baltimore, because Bateman is obviously coming back. They signed Odell Beckham. The thing is, those two just don't stay healthy. We're not going to get 17 games out of both of those guys. So I think there's going to be games where Flowers has to step up and be a really big target. But I also think Flowers' skill set really fits both Lamar Jackson and Todd Monken, their new offensive coordinator. He's a very vertical, wants to get the ball down the field, wants to do everything he can to create shot plays. Zay Flowers ran very, very fast at the NFL Combine. And so I think he's a very good fit for all the stuff that they want to do. I would say after that, in terms of fit, probably Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Like Seattle really, really needed a slot receiver. In terms of real football stuff, I wish he was a little bit better blocker, and maybe he can be, and maybe they can develop that. But like just in terms of having a receiving presence over the middle, I think he's huge there. And then you could probably convince me either way on Johnston and Addison. I think just in terms of opportunity, like Addison, I think has a much clearer shot to getting some targets, whereas like Johnston is having to battle Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, which is a little bit tough, and maybe even Eckler if they bring him back. So, but I do like Johnston's fit in Los Angeles. I thought they would take someone a little bit smaller in terms of speed, but they just apparently love their skyscrapers and took another big guy who can run. So I like it. Get as many big guys in that offense as you can get.
Is Josh Palmer still a thing, or do you think that Johnston just takes that role over?
I I think Palmer is actually still like a very good role player for them. I think when they want to get condensed, especially like inside the 20, and they want to run the ball, they want to do some play action type stuff. I actually still think Palmer has a role because he's a lot better blocker and just a better like kind of in line over the middle, that sort of stuff. The Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods type of stuff that we always see. I think he's better for that stuff. Whereas like Johnston is more like either get him the ball immediately or just let him run down the field for 50 yards. Like they're just very different roles. So I still think Palmer in this offense does have a role. It's just going to be a little bit more niche, and he's not going to be on the field as often.
All right, let's move on, I guess, to we got Rashee Rice for the Kansas City Chiefs. Do we feel like he can crack into the starting lineup there? I mean, I feel like, we're always waiting every year for one of these guys to crack in there and actually do something. Do you think he can do it?
I'm a huge fan of Rashee Rice. I think he was my wide receiver 6. But he's another guy where he just kind of fits the mold of receiver I like. He's a very rocked up player. Like he's very thick in his build, very strong. He's a bully, both as a blocker and in terms of playing the ball in the air. Even when he has the ball, he's one of those like bully ball style, Anquan Boldin, just going to run through your face as much as he can style of player. So I just love his attitude. And I think he brings a lot in terms of physicality. And I think that's actually really important for how Kansas City has structured their offense. And I think they've been needing a little bit more of that from their receiver core, because I think they had a lot of guys lately who haven't really brung that. And now that they don't have Juju Smith-Schuster in the lineup, I think they really, really needed a guy like that. So I actually do think he has a chance, maybe not like a starter every week and not getting a ton of snaps every single week. But I think with the way that Andy Reid just loves to change up his personnel depending on the matchup and stuff, I do think he's going to get a lot of opportunities, especially because like there really is no clear number one in that offense. Like I think they're always going to have to do a lot of shuffling to try to get into the right stuff. So I think he brings enough that he's going to get a lot of opportunities. And I'm also not the biggest Kadarius Toney fan, so I think it would not be that surprising if he eclipses him.
It's kind of rough for fantasy though, right, Brandon?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you do with all of that? You got Sky Moore, you got Toney, you got Rice. I mean, are you drafting any of them? Are you avoiding?
It's been a while since the Chiefs and Andy Reid have really, really used their rookie receivers, and so I'm cautiously optimistic about Sky Moore feeling like a little. I'm not talking breaking into wide receiver 1 territory, but right. I think Sky Moore will go from being unusable in fantasy to being usable in fantasy. I think we're going to see Marcus Valdes-Scantling, but one thing we know about Patrick Mahomes is that he spreads the ball around, and one thing we know about the best receiver in Kansas City is that his name is Travis Kelce. So yeah, Rashee Rice, I'm excited to watch him. I'm drafting him in Dynasty. I'm probably not counting on him as an every week, even wide receiver 3 in fantasy.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, let's move on to a fellow AFC West team, just a state away. We got Marvin Mims in Denver. I know Jerry Jeudy today got a little contract extension. So, I mean, what do we think about Marvin Mims? What do we think his role is going to be, Derek, in Denver this year?
I would also like to know the answer to that question because their receiving room is very it's crowded. They're getting Tim Patrick back from injury. Like they still have KJ Hamler there, even though he's not, I think, been what people wanted. So it's kind of weird to find a role for him. I think ideally his role is kind of like what Marquise Goodwin was last year for the Seahawks, where he's your number 3. He plays out of the slot primarily, and his job is mostly to stretch the field. And I think if things work out, that's obviously pretty good for Russell Wilson, because like when we've seen him at his best, it's pushing the ball down the field as often as he can, playing shot plays and all that stuff. And I think Mims, if he kind of comes out of the gate a little hot and looks ready to play, I think that could actually be a good fit if Russ rebounds a little bit, which I think is possible with Sean Payton. So I think there's potential for a role for him there. It's just kind of like some of these other teams. It's like the room is just so crowded. And especially if Tim Patrick comes back healthy, like he's a good player. He's a very different player, but he's a good player and he's a really good ball winner. So to me, it's just like, it's a weird spot to like feel good about how much snaps he's going to get.
Yeah, I hear you. It's tough. I mean, I actually live here in Denver, and it's just like you said, it's a very, very crowded room coming off of a really bad offense. So it's tough to kind of see what's going to happen there. Let's move on. Let's do a little more wide receiver action. We've got the undersized Nathaniel Tank Dell, who's a 3rd rounder in Houston. Do you think he can be more than a return specialist, or do you think that's his destiny?
I think immediately I don't feel very confident about him being like a useful receiver. Just because I think he's one of those players where I think he could be a useful number 3 in an offense that is already very good, like a cherry on top type of player. Because I think he's really good at yards after the catch. He's very twitchy. He's very fast. I just don't think he has the size to be one of your primary like receiving threats. I just like he's never going to be able to play outside, in my opinion. It's going to be hard for him to make contested catches, play over the middle, all that sort of stuff. He's going to have to be a little bit of a manufactured piece, almost like a better version of what they had in Kiki Kuti like 3-4 years ago or something like that. But I do think he's going to be an incredible returner. Like the movement skills are amazing. It's just when I think he was like 5'8", 165. That to me is just, I'm a very like sizeist kind of football evaluator. And that for me, it's kind of tough.
I mean, that's small.
Yeah.
That's
it's
smaller
very,
than
very
me.
small.
So, I mean, that's
He's definitely going to be in my return specialist article in July, though. He absolutely will be there, as Houston's been trying to get somebody other than Desmond King to return punts. So I think it'll be him.
All right, we've got a couple more third rounders. We've got Jalin Hyatt, who went to the Giants, and we've got Cedric Tillman, who went to the Browns. They went back to back. They're explosive. What do we expect from these two as rookies?
The Hyatt thing is weird because during the draft cycle, I was a lot lower on Jalin Hyatt than a lot of people. A lot of people had him in the first round, top 50, all that stuff. I thought he was like a third round player just because, the speed is incredible, but I just thought he wasn't that clean of a route runner. Didn't know what he's going to give you after the catch, even though he's very fast. He just didn't seem like he had natural vision. But now then he actually falls to the third round. And it's like, well, this is actually where I thought he should be taken. So this is actually, I kind of like this. And I do think the Giants kind of needed speed because I think their biggest problem last year was they just really, really struggled to take the top off of teams. Like we saw at certain points, Isaiah Hodgins was kind of able to do it. Sometimes Darius Slayton is kind of able to do it, but they're not very consistent players. I think at least in that role, Jalin Hyatt can be a very, very consistent downfield threat. It's really just a matter of how much Daniel Jones is going to be able to unlock that part of his game. He's very willing to do it. It's just a matter of, how accurate can he be and how clean can they keep him? Who was the other one? Oh, Cedric Tillman. Big fan. I think he was my wide receiver 5. He's another guy where, to me, why I loved him in this class is this was kind of a weird wide receiver class where all of the top receivers were, kind of niche players in a way. Like Quentin Johnston was, kind of just a deep threat who is really big and is going to give you yards after catch, but he's not like a true X receiver. Jordan Addison is too small to be a true X receiver. Same thing with Zay Flowers. JSN is purely slot. It was all these weird guys. Cedric Tillman was like a true throwback 1990s X receiver where he's just a big, explosive ball winner on the boundary. And I love that style of player. And I think if he hadn't gotten banged up and not been fully healthy in 2022, I think he would have even maybe gone in the back of the end of the first round. I think he has that type of talent. So I'm really, really excited about him in Cleveland.
His 21 tape is great.
It's crazy, man. He's faster than everybody. He's bigger than everybody. He's explosive. He's like a fairly clean route runner too. He's not insane, but he's for a guy that size, it looks pretty good. And then you add that on top of being a ball winner. It's hard not to love him.
Oh, we got a question here from Mr. Scampers. Tank Dell or Tutu Atwell rest of season? Brandon, you have thoughts?
I think the Tutu Atwell ship has sailed. I think I'm done. And the size. He's just so small. I'd rather go with Dell. Even though Dell is also small, I'd rather go Dell.
They're both small. All right, we got one more wide receiver to talk about, and that is Josh Downs, who went to the Colts. They also signed Isaiah McKenzie. So I assume those guys will be fighting for the slot. Do you think Downs earns that slot job out of the gate, or is he going to have to fight for it in camp?
I would imagine he earns the job. At least I would hope so. Downs, I think, outside of JSN, was the best true slot receiver where that I think is the only position he's going to play. But he's really good at it. I think he's an above average athlete. He is fairly good with the ball in his hands. He's not incredible. I don't think he really has home run speed, but he's going to be a guy who kind of squeezes out 4 or 5 yards here and there over the middle and stuff like that. And then he's really, really good about finding the ball and playing the ball in the air for someone who is not very big. I think he weighed in at 172 or something like that. But he does a really good job of playing in traffic. And if you're going to live in the slot in the NFL, you really, really need that. So it's good that he has that. And I do think he has those qualities over a guy like Isaiah McKenzie. I think Isaiah McKenzie is faster in the open field, but he to me is a little bit more of like a gadget player, which I think is part of why he struggled to really latch on in Buffalo, because he wasn't quite like the slot presence that Cole Beasley was. Whereas I think Downs can actually be that style of player and be a more like high volume type of guy. And the Colts really need a slot receiver. I really like their outside guys in Pittman and Pierce, but they need someone who can play over the middle. And I think Downs can do that. And
McKenzie also will likely be featured in my return specialist article. I think that's his
good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's too bad. I like McKenzie. I mean, I'm a UGA homer, so any guy out there, I root for him to do well. And he had some good games last year, but then he got hurt, and yeah. Is there anyone else that we did not mention wide receiver wise that you think we should?
Tyler Scott. He went later than I thought he was going to, but he is a guy who I think if everything really breaks right for him and like he hits the absolute peak of what his spectrum as a prospect can be, I think he can be pretty similar to what Tyler Lockett is in Seattle. So I don't know if he's actually going to get there, but like that's the style of player I see. I think he could be like a really good number 3 for a team, and there's like a 10 to 15% chance he becomes a really solid number 2. So I was surprised he went as late as he did. I was surprised he went after his teammate, Trey Tucker, who to me is a little bit more of like a gadget guy, whereas I think Tyler Scott is like a very legitimate, slot Z hybrid type of receiver. So that's the guy I would be excited about.
This is a big thing. Every time we ask somebody to bring up a receiver we didn't bring up, they always say Tyler Scott. So apparently we all need to pay attention to Tyler Scott. This is great.
He's a good player.
We talk about him every week somehow. He makes his way into the conversation.
I love it. Zachary Murdoch wants to know about Kayshon Boutte from LSU. What do you think of his landing spot and what his prospects are, Derek?
He's just purely as a talent. He had like back end of the first round, top 50 type of talent. It was very clear early in this season that he just was checked out for whatever reason. I don't know if it was like he didn't like Brian Kelly coming over, the new offensive stuff. Like, I don't know what it is, but he just very clearly seemed checked out. And it wasn't just a drops issue. Like, that was pretty verifiable in the numbers. But he just didn't seem like he was getting in and out of his routes the same way he had in 2021, all that sort of stuff. But I think he could be a decent player. Like, if he can kind of get things back on track, I think he's very clearly talented. To me, he actually kind of reminds me of a guy who's flamed out a little bit now, but like Keelan Cole, who had played for the Jaguars for a little bit, where he's like one of those kind of thicker slot players where he's really good at like playing in traffic, kind of bullying people when he has the ball, that sort of stuff. So I think, like I said, if he really just like turns himself around and gets back on track, the talent is all there. And we've seen him have really good tape before. Like, it's not projection. We saw him play really good football in 2021. It's just a matter of getting that guy out of him again. And I guess if there's anyone that could do it, it could be Bill, but we'll see.
And certainly New England has an opening there for a good receiver to emerge. Absolutely. Mr. Scampers wants to know if there's any undrafted free agents you're eyeing. That's a deep question, Derek. Anyone come to mind? If it's okay, if not, that's a deep question.
Yeah, I don't even remember who actually got drafted and who didn't get drafted is really the problem.
I will. I'm going to push Scampers. Go follow Shane Hallam, who was on the show last week. He does a phenomenal job keeping track of the undrafted free agents. He's probably got a tweet about it. Let's move on to running backs, Derek. What can we realistically expect from Bijan Robinson in Atlanta as a rookie? He's going as the RB3, the 9th overall pick. So if you want him in fantasy, you have to pay for him. Can he return the type of numbers as a rookie that fantasy managers are going to want him to?
Efficiency wise, well, that's the thing. I think the fantasy people, he might not. And the reason I say that is I still think Tyler Algier is very, very good. And I think he still fits a lot of what Arthur Smith wants to do. And I think they're going to actually try to not necessarily split the backfield, but really try to make sure a good portion of Bijan Robinson's touches are in the passing game and really not just like fully murder him as a runner, kind of like they did with Derrick Henry. Because like with Derrick Henry, you couldn't split up his touches because he couldn't catch. Like, he just couldn't play out of the backfield. So you had to just give him 30 carries a game if you wanted to get him 30 touches. With Bijan, it can be, you can split it up a little bit. And then I think that's where Tyler Algier's carries are going to come in. But in terms of efficiency and like how it's going to look on the field, I think he's going to be incredible. Like, I thought Bijan was the best offensive player in the draft. I think his film was unbelievable. Like, a player his size to have the burst, the acceleration, the balance that he does is just, it's unbelievable to me. And then as a third down player, he's incredible. Like as a receiver, not only is he good out of the backfield and can give you like the run after catch stuff, we've seen him run like catch wheel routes down the sideline against Alabama. Like, you know, he can actually be a vertical player. He can line up in the slot. He can line up as a wide receiver. Not quite the Christian McCaffrey level, but like not that far off, if you're asking me. So I think he's going to be an unbelievable player. It's really just a matter of like how many carries do they still give to Tyler Algier.
I like that. Nice, refreshing perspective there. Saquon Barkley was the comp we got. How does he compare to the way you viewed Saquon Barkley as a prospect coming out?
I think they're like the same tier. I just think they're very, very different players, and I prefer the style of player that Bijan Robinson. And the reason I say that is Bijan is he's very consistent, and he's like a floor raising type of player where like his vision is immaculate. Like he's never going to run himself into bad carries. He's going to like, you know, if he gets hit 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, he's going to find a way to make it a 1 yard gain. Like just very good at keeping ahead of the sticks and like ahead of the chains and all that stuff. And then he still has enough explosiveness. And then he's also just really good on third down. You never have to take him on the field because not only is he a good pass catcher, like I just said, he's also a phenomenal pass blocker, and he's really going to go do it. And you never have to be scared that he's going to, you know, get your quarterback killed. And for me, that stuff really matters. That's why I stumped for Ezekiel Elliott for a long time, even though he's clearly lost it now. But for a long time, I still really liked him because he had that. Le'Veon Bell was the same way, really had all that stuff. So I'm just a big fan of that style of back, whereas to me, Barkley is a little bit more, you're going to get some home runs and you're going to get some strikeouts.
That makes sense. I love this. So Jen, with a little reality check here, based on what Derek said, we love the player. Are you paying for Bijan Robinson then, considering that he's going to cost you the 1.09 in best ball drafts?
So, you know, we've talked about that last week, I think, and the week before, and I was not buying him before. I'm still not buying him. I cannot pay like a first round 9th spot draft capital for a guy that hasn't played a snap in the NFL. It's too difficult for me. I do like the landing spot. I think it's great. And I think that, it justifies it a smidge. So I understand why other people would do that. I would just rather have somebody else there. It's just not my brand of fantasy, but I understand it. And I would be a lot more comfortable if he was a second rounder,
Makes
15, I cannot pay first round draft capital for a rookie of any kind. It's too scary for me.
Makes sense. That Atlanta offense is going to be just interesting to see what they do this year with all those weapons. Yes. I mean, there's a lot of weapons beside the one that you kind of need the most. Hey, no Desmond Ridder slander in front of me. Look, I have too much stock in him in my dynasty leagues. I need this to work out, Jen.
Well, listen, I mean, he's not the worst, quarterback on an NFL roster right now. He may be the worst starter on an NFL roster right now, but he's not the worst.
Sam Howell might be starting games. So
no way. I think Jacoby Brissett is going to be starting by the end.
You think Brissett starts? Look,
I do, but if Sam Howell does start, then he gives him a run for the money as in the bottom.
Look, Howell and Ridder, Pro Bowl NFC quarterbacks this year. That's okay. Obviously I'm kidding, but fun stuff to see. Let's Derek, help me figure out the impact on the Seattle backfield. I love Ken Walker, and they brought in another second rounder. They brought in Zach Charbonnet. Why did they do that? And what's that Seattle backfield going to look like?
I think they're going to split it up a lot. And the reason is Ken Walker is kind of like what I just talked about with Barkley, where you're going to get home runs. Like when he finds a way to get to the outside on the perimeter, breaks one tackle, he has that athletic ability to just all of a sudden he's 60 yards down the field and nobody is close to him. That he has that kind of ability. On the other hand, he's also kind of blind sometimes, and he runs himself into a lot of contact he shouldn't be running himself into, runs himself into a lot of his own linemen, like just doesn't. Sometimes if you block him 4 yards, he's going to get one somehow, like that type of thing. And I think actually for a coach like Pete Carroll specifically, I think he can't have that as his primary running back. And I think he realized that. And I think that's why he went for a guy like Charbonnet, who to me is he's a lot more stable. He actually almost is like Algier or like a James Conner, where he's bigger, thicker running back, does really well between the tackles. His vision is good. Not going to be a home run hitter really, but if you block him 4, he's going to find a way to get 5 or 6 because he's going to find the right hole and he's going to fall down for an extra yard or two, which sounds stupid, but you do that, 70 times over a season, that really adds up. So I think that's the reason they did it. And then kind of the cherry on top is actually Charbonnet is pretty good out of the backfield. Not like in a, he's not going to run wheel routes and all that stuff, but if you throw him checkdowns, he has really good hands, and I think he can give you enough in that sense. So I think they're really going to try to split up the touches in this backfield.
It's going to be interesting to see how far Ken Walker drops in fantasy drafts, because he's been going, as the RB3, RB6, kind of in that area in a lot of early drafts. And now we'll let all the dust settle and see where that ADP lands later. But that's going to be interesting. Jen, how much does that affect your approach to Ken Walker?
Well, I was going to say first, don't sleep on my boy Kenny McIntosh, who also
True, I forgot they drafted him. Yeah,
who also went to the Seattle Seahawks. So don't forget about. They always hoard running backs there. I mean, I'm glad he got drafted. So I doubt he'll crack anything, but he'll be there. So Ken Walker, by the way, right now is granted it's been 2 days of ADP, but right now he is the running back 11.
Oh, okay. So he dropped.
So he has dropped already in the last 2 days with the addition of Charbonnet. It's tough because I'm one of those people that I'm always going to draft Seattle running backs because we know that Pete Carroll is always going to run them.
That's what Pete wants to do.
One of them's going to be good.
And it doesn't matter. Yeah. So I will always draft them both. So I will be drafting both, and I'll sprinkle in some Kenny McIntosh. I've already drafted him even before I knew his spot. He's my 19th, 20th round just to have him in the mix. Because listen, I had no problem drafting DJ Dallas and Travis Homer for years, just thinking, okay, maybe one of them will pop. Because someone will get hurt, and then Pete Carroll will keep trotting them out there. So I think they both, like Derek said, they're both going to have a role, and I think they'll both be fantasy relevant for sure.
I will say, Chris Carson came to power around the time that
I
Rashad Penny was a
Chris
first-round
Carson.
pick. So, that's how it goes. Let's go on to a little later in the draft. Kendre Miller, Tyjae Spears, New Orleans and Tennessee, respectively. Can they make an impact in their first year? Obviously, there's people ahead of them, but people really like the talent there. What do you think year one? Are we going to see them much, Derek?
Spears, I would say for sure, for a couple of reasons. One, I think just in terms of skill set, he brings so much that Derrick Henry just doesn't have. He's a really good pass catcher. I think he's a lot quicker. He's a little bit better, on the boundary and that sort of stuff. He's better in space. So I think he just really brings a good change of pace in that sort of sense. And I think it'll be a little bit easier for that offense to play out of gun with a guy like him. Whereas there were times the past couple of years where they would get into shotgun and put a fullback at running back because they were well, we don't trust any of our running backs to catch, just get the best blocker out there. They would do that type of stuff. I don't think that's going to be a problem with Tyjae Spears. I think he can actually go give you some stuff in the passing game. But I also think it's that they realize that Derrick Henry can't take the amount of carries that he's taken any longer. The fact that he's done it for this long is incredible. I don't think he can be a almost 400 carry type of guy again. And I think they're actually going to really have to split up their touches. So I think he actually could get a fair amount of carries in that offense. I guess it's really just going to depend on how much they can stay in their game script, which with that roster might be an issue. But in terms of splitting up the reps, I think it'll actually be sort of fair. Miller is a tough one for me. I think in terms of opportunity, it's not that bad. Because I think they're an offense that is always going to use, multiple running backs as much as they can. And I think he actually does have home run type of speed, home run type of ability. I just was not all that high on him as a runner, but it again kind of goes back to what I said with Bijan, where he's just my style of runner. The vision is incredible, all that stuff. Kendre Miller doesn't have any of that. He can have issues finding the right lane. I don't love his balance, all that sort of stuff. So I think the opportunity is kind of there, and he has the home run speed. I'm just not, I think, as sold on the players as some other people, or even as the Saints, evidently.
Makes sense. And they did bring in Jamal Williams, so they do have,
sure.
A couple good backs there. You brought up Devon Achane at the top of the hour. I just wanted to say, I won't get into Achane again. I'm excited that you're excited about him as a Miami Dolphins fan, so I'm hoping that he just crushes here. I do want to talk about Tank Bigsby, however, and how he's going to fit into that Jacksonville backfield. Another player who is entering a backfield that has an established player, but what kind of role could you see him developing alongside Travis Etienne?
I would not, if you're a Travis Etienne owner, I would not be very worried. And that's not to say Bigsby is bad. I just think I think they're bringing him in to really just be like an innings eater, like a relief pitcher type of deal. I think that's all it is, because I think Bigsby actually is a really good athlete and he's really well built. He has really good balance. Like, he's explosive for a guy his size. He has fairly good speed, even if he's not a leader or anything. He, to me, is kind of another guy where he's boom or bust. Like, he's going to do something incredible, if he gets hit in the backfield, or he's going to try to make something happen in space. Sometimes he's also going to run into his own lineman, and you're going to be really pissed off as a coaching staff. But if that's your number 2 back who's only taking, 8-9 carries a game or something like that, if you can get 3 of those really good plays, that's good enough. Like, I think that's good enough. So I actually do like the landing spot there, and I like him with in the Peterson offense and stuff. It's just I wouldn't be too worried about him taking over the starting role or anything like that.
Nice. So Travis Etienne managers, settle down. Everything is going to be okay. Any running backs, any sleeper running backs we didn't talk about that we should?
I kind of like Roschon Johnson. I think he ended up in Chicago. Obviously overshadowed by, the number 8 pick in the draft, which is really tough. But I think if he played at like literally any other Big 12 program, he would have been the starter. And I think he would have been really good. Just the tank. Like, he's just a big dude. And I think he does really, really well in terms of vision. And he's actually a pretty good pass catcher for a big guy. Usually you don't get that from guys that are that size. You just get like plotters, but I think he's actually a guy who can catch out of the backfield. So I'd be pretty excited about him.
Oops, sorry, on mute. It happens. Awesome. All right, well, let's dip into tight ends. We're doing pretty well here on time, but we're getting close. So let's break into tight ends. There was a lot of actually good tight ends this year, which is a rarity. But let's start with the first rounder, Dalton Kincaid. I actually wrote an entire 1,200 word article about him this morning, so I'm raring to go about that. But I'm going to ask you first, Derek. Yeah, I'm going to ask you first, Derek. How do you feel that he fits in with the Bills' offense, just from a regular football perspective?
I think he kind of changes the offense in a way, because I think what we saw really the past, basically since Josh Allen has been good, is that they've wanted to be as in 10 personnel and in 11 personnel as much as possible, spread the field, all that sort of stuff. But we've seen the last 2 years, they've done some experimenting with what if we put a fullback on the field? What if we put 2 tight ends on the field? But they just didn't have that second tight end. They didn't have a fullback that could really give them everything they wanted. So I think actually bringing in Kincaid, who can actually give them a really, really good second tight end, I think that actually can kind of change the way that their offense is going to function overall. I think they might start running the ball a little bit more. I think we're going to see more tight formations. I think they're actually going to be a little bit more creative and more adaptable inside the red zone, because I think they had some problems previously in the red zone because they just didn't have many dudes who were big, and it was basically just throw a 50-50 ball to Dawson Knox or Josh Allen, go run somebody over. That was kind of their red zone offense. I think Kincaid actually kind of helps them fix that. So I think he definitely is going to cut into Dawson Knox's production a little bit, but I think in terms of actual football, I think it really changes their offense for the better.
That's interesting. I mean, I was looking, from a fantasy perspective, I'm kind of looking at, Kincaid ran a lot of his routes from the slot last year. At Utah. So, the Bills lost McKenzie and they don't have Beasley. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. Maybe he'll kind of slide in there and do stuff there. So I feel like, I think he will cut in a little bit to Knox, but at the same time, I don't know, Knox has been pretty inconsistent. It's not like he's been this, fantasy tight end one that we've all coveted for years. So I feel like, I don't know, it's one of those things where we always say that, rookie tight ends rarely hit. And I think Kincaid has the potential to do so. I think I'd consider him a fantasy tight end too, going into the draft, but I think he definitely has a potential to sneak into the top 12 tight ends. If he can adapt well to the NFL, learns everything right away and gets going. I think that, in that offense, I think he's got a high ceiling. Brandon, any thoughts on Kincaid, or you're good?
I'm kind of with Derek here. I think he's a really good addition to the offense, but I think that fantasy managers who get super excited about him are going to be disappointed, because I think Josh Allen spreads the ball around, and I think that we're going to get Stephon Diggs and we're going to get some boom weeks from Kincaid and a lot of bust weeks from Kincaid. And I think we're going to get Dawson Knox with vulture touchdowns. And I think we're going to get a lot of that stuff. So I'm kind of with Derek on this one, but I get your point, Jen.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right, let's move on. So in the second round, well, we already talked about Sam LaPorta, Michael Mayer. We also had Luke Schoonmaker went to Dallas. Brenton Strange went to Jacksonville in the second round. Do we see either of them having a big impact as a rookie?
Unfortunately, no. I actually do like both of them. I like Luke Schoonmaker. He actually is kind of like another guy who I think we're going to talk about in a second. I think he's kind of like the discount Luke Musgrave in this class, where he's just a big dude who runs exceptionally well, blocks pretty well. He's going to block his heart out. Just not all the way there as a route runner yet. Sometimes doesn't really win the ball the way that, a typical tight end would. But just in terms of like a field stretcher, I think he really, really brings it. So I do think he's a little bit more athletic than some of the tight ends the Cowboys have now. But they kind of have this weirdly crowded tight end room of like 3 or 4 guys who like they've given plenty of snaps to before. And I think it would be hard for a mid-round rookie tight end to crack that. The other one, Brenton Strange, I don't really think they brought him in to like catch that many passes. I think they really brought him in to be like an F like wing type of blocker because Peterson really loves to have that type of guy in his system. And I think Brenton Strange really brings that, where he's like explosive, moves really well in the short area. He's going to block his ass off. So I think in terms of like the actual fit in the offense, it's great. I just don't think they're going to give him that many targets.
Yeah, I think you're right there with both those. Like you mentioned, Luke Musgrave. We're moving on to Green Bay. They actually drafted 2 tight ends. They drafted him, and they also drafted Tucker Kraft in the 3rd round. I mean, we know Green Bay needed a tight end, right? I mean, they lost Robert Tonyan. Mercedes Lewis is now, I think, unsigned somewhere. How do you feel? I mean, do you have a favorite one or the other as far as, I guess, real football, and then we can talk fantasy after?
I had graded them very, very closely, but I did have a slight edge towards Kraft because I think he was just, to me, a little bit more of a complete player. Like, to me, Musgrave is the home run swing. I think if everything turns out right for Musgrave, he can be like Darren Waller, where he's just an unbelievable field stretcher, super explosive. He can play out of the slot. He's almost like a wide receiver. Just in terms of the real football, like I think he can block, but he's going to need to get better at it and show a little bit more. So I want to see from that. But Tucker Kraft is kind of the opposite, where I think he's like above average to good-ish at like everything, but doesn't necessarily have an elite trait. If anything, I think his run after the catch type of stuff is pretty good because he's a really good athlete who is very well built. Has really good balance. So I think if he could like clean up his route running a little bit, I think he could be pretty effective. But I think he's going to be the better blocker out of the gate. So it's kind of just a matter of like, what is Green Bay trying to do that week, really?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Brandon, do you feel for fantasy? I mean, are you drafting either one of these guys?
Not in redraft. In Dynasty, I'm drafting both of them. So just curious about both of them. So, but yeah, and also Luke Musgrave, Oregon State University. So I love the kid, and I'm going to be rooting for him tremendously. I grew up near Oregon State University, so.
Well, all right. Well, speaking of, might as well stay homer for this last guy. We got Darnell Washington. I'm super bummed that he landed in Pittsburgh. I'm super bummed that he fell. I mean, I guess there was some sort of back issue that I had not heard anything about, and then all of a sudden he just kind of started falling. Landed in Pittsburgh, which, I mean, they have Pat Freiermuth, who's pretty locked in as their guy. So do you feel like Darnell Washington is just buried there? Is he just going to hang out for a bit?
I was also sad that he fell because he was my tight end too. I liked him a lot because you just don't find guys that big that move like that very often. It's really, really hard. God only made a few of those. So I really liked him. I like you said, I think he really only fell for the injury stuff. In terms of his snap share, I actually kind of think they could play with 2 tight ends a lot because I think the way they actually want to build the ecosystem of this offense is to get into 12 personnel, run the hell out of Najee Harris, and be like a bully ball type of team. And then just whatever extra flair and explosiveness you get from Kenny Pickett is kind of like an added bonus, almost like what the Seahawks had done in the early aughts of the Russell Wilson days. Like, obviously, he's not that kind of talent, Pickett, but I think that style of offense they could do. Washington, I think out of the gate, he's probably not going to be nearly the receiver that Freiermuth is, because I think Freiermuth is just a better route runner right now. He's an incredible ball winner. He's a really good athlete. But I still think, well, they're going to put Washington on the field a lot because he's just a way better blocker than Freiermuth is right now. Like, for as good of a receiver as Freiermuth is, he cannot block. And so I think that's why they went after a guy like Washington, who, if you go back and watch that Oregon game, every other clip is him just killing some poor Oregon defender. And I don't think it'll look too different in the NFL. So I do like the fit in terms of real football. It's just, I don't really know how I would gauge it in terms of how many targets he's going to get and stuff like that.
That's very encouraging. I like that. Darnell Washington has a future in the league in that regard. I like it.
I do too, of course. I need to circle back real quick before we move on, because our friend Zach Murdoch made a little joke, but he's talking about Laviska Shenault real quick, because it's kind of an inside joke with us, because it's a long story. But anyway, to answer your question, Zach, I am not concerned for Laviska Shenault, because I'm not concerned about Laviska Shenault. He's not on my radar. We're done. I think that ship has sailed on Mr. Shenault. Regardless of who they drafted, regardless of who they bring in, we're done. He's not a thing. Okay, move on. We're moving on, I think, to quarterbacks, right? We got to wrap this up soon.
Yeah, we do. We got to kind of zip through these. We've been holding you too long, Derek. I appreciate you. Quickly, we did have a Discord question I wanted to talk about with Space Ghost Force. Any favorite round 3 or round 4 running backs to target in rookie drafts? I think we answered that. Roschon Johnson and Devon Achane, especially, definitely guys to target in that territory. So quarterbacks, we talked about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Derek, let's talk about Anthony Richardson. Obviously, huge range of outcomes for this guy. How soon do you think we could see him under center in Indianapolis?
Week 1. I think he's starting out of gate. Because really, I think he's not the project that people think that he is. I think he's definitely incomplete, but I think people have gotten into their heads, I think especially coming off of Malik Willis last year, who was obviously like very much a project. I think people have kind of equated them in their minds. And to me, that's just not true. Because when I watch Richardson, obviously he has some ball placement issues. There's 4 or 5 throws a game where it's like, dude, come on. We know you can be better than this. But in terms of like the way that he's trying to play quarterback, it to me feels very serious and like very mature. Like his pocket movement is unbelievable. I think he does a really good job of like knowing when he's hot and to just get the ball out, check it down, throw it away, avoid negative plays. Like I don't remember the number, but his pressure to sack ratio is like unbelievably low in college. Like he just did not get sacked. He found ways to get out of it. And obviously his athleticism helps there, but he did a really good job of understanding how to keep himself clean. And I think even as a processor, like I think he's going to need to speed it up a tick, but I think he showed that he was able to get like 1 to 2 to 3, generally stay on rhythm, and be confident about what he was seeing and that sort of stuff. But I think even the like needing to speed up a tick, he was 20 years old as a first-year starter. Like, yeah, isn't all the way there yet. But I think he can get there because just some of the other stuff I said, just in terms of his maturity of pocket management, all that stuff. So I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited for him.
That's exciting. I like it. It seems like a good kid. Seems like seems like a guy who works hard. Like I'm excited to see him play. Any redraft value for Will Levis? Like, do we expect anything from him in year 1, or is he strictly a long-term project?
You might be able to pick him up when Tannehill gets hurt. But that's really, I think, the only thing that's going to happen here, because I think they're really going to use this year to just let Tannehill eat some punches, for basically what is like his probably last year there. And then I think they're going to transition to Levis next year. So I think Levis could end up being actually very, very similar to Ryan Tannehill. Like when things work out, I just don't think we're going to see it this year. Maybe when the season fully falls apart, but
yeah. I'm not going to say they look alike, but I'm not going to say they don't
I'm not going to say they don't, right?
Yeah, right? Finally, Hendon Hooker, obviously probably not starting at all this year unless something happens to Jared Goff and his health checks out. But, next year is the time when Detroit really needs to make a decision on Jared Goff contract-wise. They could save a ton of money off the cap by cutting him next year, free agent the year after. Hendon Hooker, when you're looking to 2024, is he interesting over any of those 4 quarterbacks that went ahead of him?
Not to me. I was not very big on Hendon Hooker, and I don't want to do my whole spiel and bash on him again. But he to me just felt more like a quarterback that we've seen go in the 4th, 5th round before, where he's kind of toolsy but not complete, coming from an offense that is a little bit Mickey Mouse. And I think he just, he got a little bit lucky, and there's been some overcorrection in terms of that style of prospect. So I'm not all that excited for him in that sense. I think the other guys were more legitimate first round type of talents.
Makes sense. And obviously had 2 third-round receivers, including Cedric Tillman, which we like. So definitely helped him out. I won't take up any more of your time today, Derek. Thank you so much for joining us. Listeners should definitely read Derek's stuff over at New York Times Sports, Bleacher Report. Follow Derek on Twitter at QB Class. That's class with a K. Derek, any final thoughts or plugs before you go?
No, I think that's it. I think I'm just, glad the draft season is glad we can coast into the off season.
Excellent. Honestly, listeners, follow Derek on Twitter. We want everybody, all our guests, to be followed on Twitter. Derek is legitimately one of my favorite follows. He's in every one of my little lists and things like that I make sure to follow because I like Derek's tweets so much. It's great analysis. Jen, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on again. Listeners, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Jen Akins NFL, at 2guysbrandon. Thanks for checking us out and have a good day.